Welcome to another episode of Front Row, and here with me today is Dr. Vikrom Mahathur, a director at Tandem Research and an anthropologist of science and technology. And the main topic we'll be discussing today is about artificial intelligence and what kind of impact it could have on a country like Sri Lanka. So Vikram, for Sri Lanka, how could artificial intelligence affect the future of work and the skills in demand?
Okay, so I think before I start, I must say that Tandem Research is a Goa-based, which is Goa in India, based research collective doing research at the interface of technology and society. So we are sociologists and anthropologists of technology, looking at how technology is shaped and is shaping society. On the question of the future of work in Sri Lanka, AI and the future of work in Sri Lanka, I do think that we have to demystify and deconstruct the kind of hype around AI. But at the same time, I do also recognize that yes, certain material transformations in technology are taking place, and they're going to impact the world of work. And when I think about AI and the world of work, I think about three sorts of issues, right? The first category of issues is around job displacement and job loss, and basically replacement of human labor by machines, right? So that's one big issue. But equally important, I think we need to think about the impact of AI and work in the world of work in terms of employment relationships, right? How employment relationships and structure of employment is likely to change. And then we also need to think harder about the impact on what I call persistent forms of inequity in labor markets and in workplaces, right? So those are the three sets of issues that I'm going to talk about. When it comes to job loss, we see both within the services and the manufacturing sector that repetitive jobs that require training but do not require cognitive skills are increasingly going to get automated. Whereas high-end jobs which required cognitive skills are not going to get automated, and really manual low-end jobs, whether it's lifters in cargo in warehouses and others, are unlikely to get automated as that fast, right? So it's this hollowing out of the middle which is going to lead to a kind of polarization in the workplace, but also within society at large, which I think is, to me, a critical question on the job loss issue, particularly because that impacts what we think of social mobility in the South Asian context, of how people from informal manual labor, by educating their children, are progressing upward in society. And I think it's that middle rung that will not be available for people to climb out of low skill work into high-end work because of automation. And numbers is something that I'm not going to speculate on, but there are statistics that say that 40% of tasks and jobs are automable. Whether they're automable doesn't mean they'll get automated, but at least a fairly large chunk of work is automable. Second issue is that of employment conditions. So I think what we are seeing with AI is and other kind of digital technologies is increasing platformization of work. So you see the emergence of various forms of digital platforms for labor, and in the case of in Sri Lanka, you have of course you have delivery services and location-based services which are platformized through things like PickMe, Uber, and the others, and you have high-end jobs where you're a graphic designer or you're a consultant, and you don't have to have full-time employment, but you're working through a platform on gig work, on small pieces of work. And I think so this increasing platformization is going to erode traditional forms of employment and hence traditional forms of social protection, right? The other issue that we think quite a lot about is the loss of collective bargaining, right? So unions were a really important way in which, at least in the earlier parts of this century, but even until recently, workers got rights and had bargaining vis-a-vis their employers. That bargaining is going to get diluted, and we will also see an increasing, what the International Labour Organization calls, increasing rise in non-standard forms of employment, right? right? Which is basically, contractual work. Like you have manpower companies in Sri Lanka that are catering a lot of, so within the organized sector also, a lot of the work is actually contracted out. So they don't have full-time employment. So that's the second set of transformations in employment relations. And I think the third issue that we need to think hard about is labor market inequities. So because in some sense those who lose their jobs to these transformations are not going to be the ones who get the new jobs that are going to be created. So we have to think about who are the winners and losers, and will the losers have new opportunities or not, right? Now, it's not enough to say that socially there will be some kind of, at a societal level, there will be a balancing of jobs created and jobs lost. We have to think about who are the winners and losers. And here, obviously, skill is a major way to think about it, and skilling levels is often reflective of both regional differences in Sri Lanka, but also social differences in society, right? So the entrenchment and reproduction of existing forms of inequity in the labor markets, because of this kind of technological unemployment and the skilling characteristics, is something that we need to really think hard about. We also need to think about the social and political consequences of this, right? Do you have a large pool of underskilled young workforce which is not able to, which is aspirational, which doesn't want to work in the fields, doesn't want to go and catch fish, but they're not able to find jobs to move out of this? They're not all going to become tuk-tuk drivers. We have to think about the social consequences of that kind of development.
Okay, Vikram. Considering all these changes that are happening, the potential impact, especially on trade unions, and given that Sri Lanka has a strong trade union movement, what kind of timeline is foreseeable for Sri Lanka in terms of these changes happening, of it really transforming the labor market and the workplace? Is it a 5-year to 10-year thing, or is it going to take the next 25 to 30 years for this transformation to happen?
I think giving an aggregate number is harder, but I can say that it's going to happen really fast in certain niches. And for example, one of the niche where it's going to happen quite fast and could be even 5 to 10 years is the banking and the finance sector, and also the IT BPO industry, right? So those sectors are going to see really fast adoption of digital automation, AI, and there are other sectors potentially, for example, depending on what the government pushes and how your personal data protection laws pan out, is around kind of law enforcement and policing, right? That's another area where we see a strong kind of inclination towards fast adoption. Within the manufacturing sector also, there is going to be, especially for processes and process automation, there is going to be increased adoption. Although AI solutions are available for agricultural sector, there are farm advisories, there are various forms of agri-bots that are available at least in the global markets. We see adoption within the kind of plantation agricultural sector would be reasonably slower, and also I think adoption will be reasonably slower within, say, the tourism industry and the tourism sector, especially in the hospitality, maybe not in the booking engines, and others will see a fast rate of adoption. So I would say overall 10 to 15 years, but 5 years in certain niches. And I think Sri Lanka, for example, logistics and shipping is another area which is a big part of the Sri Lankan economy, which is likely to see automation, especially in the management of ports and delivery infrastructure, warehousing, and quite rapidly so. So I think certain sectors, public sector is likely to be shielded. I know there is conversations about e-governance, and public sector is a huge employer in Sri Lanka, but obviously there will be resistance to technology within the public sector, and it's a political sector, so you might find that the e-governance is not going to move as smoothly as one might wish or not wish, as the case might be within the public sector. So I think, yeah.
Zooming out of the workplace, you mentioned that artificial intelligence will factor into policing and intelligence gathering, surveillance. So in democracies, what impact would artificial intelligence have, especially in countries like Sri Lanka, which have sometimes struggled to sustain democracy?
So I think that's a really critical question, and maybe I can point about three or four ways in which democracy is going to be impacted. I think one of the pillars of democracy is the electoral process, right? And as we have seen with the global and much cited example of Cambridge Analytica, that the AI has the potential to understand your digital behavior and micro-target nudges and ways in which it would push you to particular sorts of electoral decisions, right? So that's one big issue of how AI can be used in manipulating voter choice and voter behavior, right? I think that's something we need to think about. The second issue that we are very concerned about is media, right? And media is free, fair media is an integral part of any democracy, and I think a lot of AI-based applications do have the propensity to control social media, to create fake news, and affect kind of the freedom of press and media, right? I think that's the second thing we should think about. I think the third thing is right to kind of political contestation, right to political agreement, and with various ways. You saw recently with the big Hong Kong protests, there were these laser beams going around which were doing facial recognition of the crowds, right? So this kind of crowd control and protest control using facial recognition and creating databases of people who are protesting or who are creating opposition and creating ways to surveil them, right? I think that surveillance of political dissent is another issue that I think we should really be worried about. And I equally think that in some sense, with the kind of digitization and the kind of enthusiasm around the new digital universe, there is this kind of privileging of efficiency and productivity over issues of fairness, equity, deliberation. In a kind of societal conversation, I feel like myself being marginalized in a lot of technology conversations because I'm not talking necessarily about efficiency, productivity, and I'm more concerned about issues of fairness and equity. And I think that kind of subtle discourse and subtle social changes are also something that we need to kind of think about in the context of creating free, liberal societies.
Thank you, Vikram. And as Vikram highlighted, while there is a lot of optimism about artificial intelligence, we need to also be aware that how this transforms the workplace and also transforms democracy in the future. There needs to be certain checks and balances, especially on the ethics of using artificial intelligence. So I think this was a really good conversation to give a more realistic understanding of this topic. Thank you, Vikram, for joining Front Row, and hope to see you at another episode of Front Row. Thank you.